10 rock stars, 10 official verdicts. And in every single case, every single one, the autopsy said something different from what we were handed.
I was right beside you.
Some of these findings were rushed, some were sealed, some were quietly buried by people with money, reputations, or worse on the line. And a few of them are still being debated right now because the evidence keeps surfacing things nobody wanted you to find.
Baby, it's a wild world. It's hard.
You've heard the tributes, the biopics, the tragic death at 27 retrospectives, but what the toxicology actually showed, what the pathologist saw on the table, that's the conversation nobody wanted to have. We're having it tonight, starting at number 10. Number 10, Bon Scott. Bon Scott died on February 19th, 1980. AC/DC was 6 months away from Back in Black, the tribute album that would become one of the best-selling records in history. And the official story is simple. He drank too much, passed out, and choked. But here's what the investigation left behind. Bon spent his last night at the Music Machine Club in Camden, London. By the early hours of the 19th, he was barely conscious. His friend Alistair Kinnear couldn't wake him. So Kinnear made a decision that has never been fully examined. He reclined the seat in his Renault 5, put a blanket over Bon, and went inside his house to sleep. Didn't call for help, just went in. When Kinnear came back the next afternoon or 12 hours later, Bon wasn't asleep anymore. The autopsy, acute alcohol poisoning, death by misadventure. The investigation was completed and filed within roughly 72 hours. That's the part that sticks. Biographer Jesse Fink, who spent years in the weeds of Bon's final night, made the case that a 72-hour investigation into the sudden death of one of rock's biggest singers was finished so fast it was almost designed to miss things. Because here's what it didn't dig into. Everyone in Bowen's immediate orbit that last night had connections to heroin. Kinnear himself had taken heroin earlier that evening. That's documented. Witnesses who knew Bon in London in early 1980 told Fink they believed he'd used it that night. The heroin flooding London at that moment was brown, imported, and extremely strong. Now, the autopsy tested for alcohol. Whether a 1980 coroner's test completed in under 3 days, screened comprehensively for all opiates, is a legitimate question. We will never know for certain because the investigation that might have answered it was already closed. Death by misadventure. That phrase does a lot of work. It says nobody's responsible. It was the lifestyle. It was inevitable. And if you grew up hearing that Bon Scott was a wild man who burned himself out, the story fits so neatly you never question it. But the investigation that built that story took 72 hours, and Alistair Kinnear left him in the car. That part, in all these decades, has never been fully examined. Number 9 is up next, and this one involves someone who wasn't trying to hide the cause of death. They were trying to make sure the body disappeared entirely. Number 9, Graham Parsons. Graham Parsons is one of the most important figures in American music. Father of country rock, the bridge between Laurel Canyon and Nashville. He influenced the Eagles, Emmylou Harris, a generation of artists who will name him in the same breath as the people who changed everything. He died on September 19, 1973 at the Joshua Tree Inn in California. He was 26, morphine toxicity combined with alcohol. The cause of death wasn't really disputed, but someone decided the story didn't end there.
I'm your toy, I'm your old boy.
Graham had apparently said at some point, not in any legal document, not in a will, just in conversation, that he wanted to be cremated in the Joshua Tree Desert. His road manager, Phil Kaufman, took that seriously. When Graham's body was being loaded onto a plane at LAX, bound for Louisiana where his family waited to bury him, Kaufman showed up with a friend and a hearse. He told airport workers they had family authorization to take the body. They didn't, and they drove Graham Parsons out into the Mojave Desert and set him on fire. The autopsy had already been completed. The cause was already on record. But the act of stealing and incinerating that body was its own kind of statement. Whatever questions might remain, they weren't going to survive the desert heat. Kaufman and his friend were arrested, charged with grand theft, not desecrating a corpse, because California had no law against that at the time. They paid a $750 fine.
All your charms, he made whole.
Kaufman would spend the rest of his life saying he was honoring Graham's wish, and maybe he was. Maybe he genuinely believed it, but there are two ways to read what he did. You honor someone by fulfilling their wishes, or you make sure the body can't be re-examined by burning it in a desert 2 days after they died. Those two things look identical from the outside. And when someone incinerates a body that quickly, the question sitting underneath the whole story is, what were they protecting? We'll probably never know. The evidence became ash in the Mojave 50 years ago. Number 8 is next, and this one involves a verdict that the person who loved him most refused to accept for the rest of her life.
I'm your old boy.
Let's look at the numbers. Only 9% of you are actually subscribed. Honestly, that's tough to see. Our team spends days hunting down archives and verifying every single fact just to tell these stories right. If you've made it this far into the video, you're clearly part of the community, so please hit subscribe. It costs nothing and helps us immensely. Now, for those already subscribed, very few of you have made the jump to our membership, and that's a hard pill to swallow because you're the ones who know our value best. If this channel has moved you or inspired you, consider joining. It's the price of one coffee, but it's the literal fuel for this channel. Let's keep this alive together. Back to the story.
Number 8, Michael Hutchence. On November 22nd, 1997, Michael Hutchence was found dead in his room at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Sydney. He was 37 years old, the lead singer of INXS, one of the most magnetically alive frontmen rock has ever produced. Official ruling, suicide by hanging. His partner, Paula Yates, never accepted that verdict for a single day of the rest of her life. The autopsy found alcohol, cocaine, Prozac, and other substances in his system, multiple chemicals at once, interacting in a man who had suffered a serious brain injury 5 years earlier. An assault in Copenhagen in 1992 left him with trauma that, according to people close to him, changed his behavior, his moods, and his impulse control in ways that persisted until his death. Paula's argument was specific. She wasn't just grieving. She was making a case that the combination of his brain injury and the substances in his system that night created a state where Michael wasn't fully himself. That calling it suicide attributed a rational, deliberate intent to a person who, in those specific circumstances, may not have had access to rational intent. And here is what makes this genuinely complicated to resolve. Suicide, as a legal finding, assumes the person intended to die, but intent can't be quantified in a toxicology screen. Frontal lobe trauma, the part of the brain governing judgment and impulse, doesn't appear as a cause of death. Those two things existed in Michael Hutchence, and neither of them is visible in the official verdict. Paula fought that ruling publicly until her own death 3 years later. she died of a heroin overdose in 2000. She was 41. Their daughter, Heavenly Hirani Tiger Lily Hutchence, grew up without either parent. She's spoken publicly about what that means, the specific weight of a verdict you can't legally challenge, that the person who knew him best never stopped saying was wrong. Whether Paula was right about the exact circumstances, she wasn't wrong to keep asking. And that's a different kind of loss. Number 7 is next. And in this one, the thing that was supposed to be saving his life is what ended it. Number 7, Keith Moon. Keith Moon, the drummer, the force of nature, the man who somehow seemed more alive than anyone else in the room. He died on September 7, 1978. He was 32 years old. Here's what the autopsy found. 32 tablets of heminivrine in his system. Clomethazole, a sedative prescribed specifically to help him manage alcohol withdrawal. 32 tablets. The prescribed dose was 1. The medication had been prescribed to him by his doctor. I need you to sit with that for a second, because the story we've always been told about Keith Moon's death is rock star, wildlife, excess, inevitable end. And the narrative is so well worn, so immediately satisfying, that it absorbs everything, including the actual question sitting at the center of this case. Keith wasn't on unknown street drugs that night. He was taking something a physician gave him specifically because they were trying to protect his health, and the bottle contained enough to kill him. His girlfriend, Annette Walterlax, found him. She'd been awake earlier, found him eating a steak at 4 a.m, which is so Keith Moon it almost makes you smile, and gone back to sleep. When she woke again, he was gone. Inquest verdict, accidental death, overdose of heminivrine, and the story that calcified around that verdict was Keith Moon died of Keith Moon. Too much finally catching up, but that story quietly erases a question that actually deserves a straight answer. How does a patient get prescribed a substance dangerous enough to kill them at 32 doses in quantities large enough to do exactly that? What was the oversight? Who knew what about his history and his tolerance? The excess narrative of rock deaths is the most efficient cover story in the history of this music. Because when a life looks like chaos from the outside, the death fits. Nobody digs. Number 6, Chris Cornell.
But if you wanna leave, take good care. Hope you had a lot of nights.
Chris Cornell died on May 18th, 2017 at the MGM Grand Detroit Hotel. He had just performed with Soundgarden. He was 52 years old. Official cause, suicide by hanging. His wife, Vicky Cornell, did not dispute the autopsy findings. What she disputed, formally in a lawsuit, was whether Chris had been in a state where that decision was genuinely his own.
You're leaving, baby, I'm grieving.
The toxicology showed lorazepam in his system. Ativan, a benzodiazepine prescribed by his physician, Dr. Robert Cobain. Vicky's argument stated in the lawsuit was that Dr. Cobain had prescribed the medication in excessive quantities and that it had chemically impaired Chris's judgment and behavior to a degree that he was not himself that night. She talked publicly about their last phone call. She said he sounded different, slurring. Not like Chris, he concerned enough to contact hotel security for a welfare check. By the time security reached the room, it was too late. The lawsuit alleged overprescription of a drug class known to affect decision-making and impulse control at high doses, not negligence, active harm. And the specific legal question underneath the whole case, If a person's judgment is chemically impaired to the point where they cannot reason normally, does the word suicide fully describe what happened?
Oh, baby, baby, it's a wild world.
The lawsuit was settled out of court. Terms were not disclosed. A court never got to weigh in. I want to be careful here. I don't know what happened in that room. Nobody does except Chris. And the official story is medically supported. But Vicky's question wasn't grief inventing a theory. It was a legal argument about pharmaceutical responsibility, about who bears accountability when a patient is harmed by the thing that was supposed to be helping them. The settlement made sure that argument never got a public answer, and that part still gets me.
Always remember you like a child girl.
Number 5, Brian Jones.
I wanna be your man. Wanna be your man.
Brian Jones founded the Rolling Stones. He named the band. He shaped its early sound. And then, in June of 1969, Mick Jagger and Keith Richards pushed him out of the group he'd built from nothing.
Man, she's worthy of.
25 days later, on July 3rd, 1969, he was found dead at the bottom of his swimming pool at Cotchford Farm, East Sussex. He was 27 years old. The autopsy: enlarged liver and spleen consistent with years of heavy use. The coroner's verdict: death by misadventure, accidental drowning while under the influence. That was the story for 24 years.
Oh, but I love her.
Then, in November 1993, a building contractor named Frank Thorogood was dying. And according to Rolling Stones driver Tom Keelock, who was present, Thorogood said, "It was me that did Brian. I just finally snapped." Let that sit for a second. Thorogood had been doing renovation work at Cotchford Farm and was living on the property. He and Jones had been in a financial dispute, money Jones allegedly owed him. Witnesses who eventually came forward said there had been a confrontation at the pool that night, that Thorogood and Jones had gotten into it in the water, that it had gone further than roughhousing. Thorogood died before any formal action could be taken on the confession. Sussex police reviewed the case in 1994 and declined to reopen it. Reviewed it again in 2009, this time with 600 documents handed over by an investigative journalist, and declined again. Official position: the original verdict stands. Brian Jones' daughter Barbara, who only discovered her real father's identity in 2002, has said publicly she believes he was murdered, that the 1969 investigation was so intent on finding what it expected, a burned-out rock star, drugs, reckless living, that it stopped before it asked anything harder. And here's the forensic reality. The autopsy couldn't distinguish between drowning while intoxicated and being held underwater. Both look identical on the table. When the body is compromised, when the narrative already makes sense, when the death fits the life, the investigation closes. And a deathbed confession from a man who couldn't be prosecuted goes into a book, not a courtroom.
My friend, that will never fade.
Number 4, Jimi Hendrix. Jimi Hendrix died on September 18th, 1970. He was 27 years old, found unresponsive in the London apartment of his girlfriend, Monica Danneman, at the Samarkand Hotel in Notting Hill. The inquest: inhalation of vomit following barbiturate intoxication. He had taken 9 of Monica's Vesperax sleeping pills. The prescribed dose was half a tablet. The coroner recorded an open verdict, meaning not enough evidence to reach a specific conclusion. Case closed. Almost nothing about this case stayed simple. Monica Danneman's account of that night changed multiple times. The key detail, she said Hendrix was alive when paramedics arrived. The ambulance crew reported finding him alone in the apartment, already dead when they got there at 11:27 in the morning. Those two accounts do not reconcile. Monica died in 1996, taking whatever she actually knew with her. Then there's the financial angle. Jimmy's manager, Michael Jeffrey, held a $2 million life insurance policy on Hendrix, with himself as beneficiary. Jeffrey died in a plane crash in 1973 before he could ever be formally questioned. In 2009, a former roadie named James Tappy Wright published a book claiming Jeffrey had privately admitted to having Hendrix killed because Jimmy wanted out of his management contract. That claim was never verified, but it was also never investigated. And then there's what Dr. John Bannister, the physician who treated Hendrix at St. Mary Abbott's Hospital, said publicly in 1992. He stated Hendrix had an extraordinary amount of red wine in his lungs and stomach. Not vomit, wine. Far more than aspiration could explain. But he believed Hendrix had drowned, not in water, but in wine poured into him while he was unconscious. Now here's the complication that makes this case uniquely maddening. In 1992, around the same time he came forward, Bannister was struck off the medical register for fraud in an unrelated matter. His credibility is disputed. The official autopsy report described vomited matter, including wine, but not in the quantities Bannister described. So what do you have? Conflicting witness accounts, a delayed ambulance call, a manager with a documented financial motive, a doctor whose testimony can't be fully trusted, an open verdict from an inquest that asked the minimum number of questions. Each loose end dismissible on its own, all of them together, never seriously addressed as a whole. Number 3, Jim Morrison. Jim Morrison died on July 3rd, 1971 in Paris. He was 27 years old. The cause listed on his death certificate, heart failure. No autopsy was performed. One of the most famous rock singers in the world, dead at 27 in a foreign city, and nobody examined the body. Under French law at the time, an autopsy wasn't required if there was no apparent foul play and a doctor was willing to sign off. A doctor visited the apartment and signed Jim Morrison's death certificate. Pamela Corson, his girlfriend, later acknowledged she couldn't remember the doctor's name. His signature on the document was illegible. By the time Doors manager Bill Sittons flew in from the U.S. on July 6th, 3 days after Jim's death, he found a sealed coffin. He never saw the body. E. Morrison was buried at Père Lachaise Cemetery on July 7th, 8 days after he died, in a ceremony that lasted 8 minutes, with no priest and almost no mourners. Here's what we know about the people around Jim that night. Pamela's ongoing companion was a man named Jean de Breteuil, a French aristocrat who was one of the better-known celebrity heroin suppliers in Paris at the time, connected to Keith Richards, Anita Pallenberg, and others in that orbit. Multiple accounts, including Marianne Faithfull's, who was de Breteuil's girlfriend, say de Breteuil visited Morrison's apartment on the night of July 3rd. He went to see Jim Morrison, Faithfull told Mojo magazine years later, and killed him. I'm sure it was an accident. The smack was too strong. De Breteuil left Paris immediately. He died of a heroin overdose a few weeks later, same year, 1971. Pamela Corson told different versions of that night to different people over the following years. Some accounts say she told friends Jim had died of a heroin overdose that he'd snorted what he thought was cocaine. She never gave a formal statement to French police. She died of a heroin overdose on April 25th, 1974. She was 27. There is no toxicology, no chemical evidence, nothing to dispute and nothing to confirm. A body that sat in a bathtub for 3 days, a death certificate signed by an anonymous doctor, an illegible signature. The complete absence of forensic documentation isn't neutral. It's the loudest thing in the room. Number 2, Kurt Cobain. Kurt Cobain was found dead on April 8, 1994, at his home on Lake Washington in Seattle. He had been dead for 3 days. He was 27 years old. Official ruling: self-inflicted shotgun wound to the head, suicide. The autopsy confirmed the cause of death, but it also documented something that's been contested in serious detail ever since. And as of early 2026, it is back in the conversation harder than it has been in years. The toxicology showed 1.52 milligrams per liter of morphine in Kurt Cobain's bloodstream at time of death. Heroin converts to morphine in the body. That level, 1.52, has been described in multiple forensic analyses as approximately 3 times a lethal dose, even accounting for the tolerance a chronic heavy user develops. The official position has always been that Cobain's years of documented heavy use could have allowed him to function at that concentration. Tom Grant, the private investigator originally hired by Courtney Love to find Kurt after he left rehab, spent 3 decades arguing the official story had critical holes: the morphine levels, questions about the scene. A note, he argued, reads more like a professional resignation than a final farewell, with a few lines at the bottom in noticeably different handwriting. In February 2026, forensic specialist Brian Burnett and researcher Michelle Wilkins published a peer-reviewed paper in an international forensic sciences journal formally challenging the ruling. Their findings were specific. The bloodstain patterns on Cobain's clothing were not consistent with the suicide scenario as documented by Seattle police. There was no backspatter on his left hand, the hand that should have been gripping the shotgun barrel, which they argued was forensically inconsistent with the wound. And the heroin level at that concentration, their paper concluded, would have caused incapacitation too rapidly for Cobain to have injected himself, organized the scene, positioned the weapon, and fired it. Seattle police responded, "The ruling remains suicide." I want to be straight with you here. Kurt Cobain was in documented serious pain, physical and psychological. He had attempted an overdose in Rome the month before. The official story is medically and forensically defensible, but a peer-reviewed paper raising specific questions about bloodstain patterns and pharmacological timelines isn't a conspiracy theory. It's evidence asking for a precise answer. And in 32 years, that precise answer still hasn't come from anyone with the authority to provide it. Some of y'all have been following this one for decades. You already know where you land. You probably also know that we may never get a definitive answer, and that the weight of not knowing is its own particular thing. Drop where you stand in the comments. I already know this one's gonna split people. Number 1 is next, and this is the most famous rock star who ever lived. A medical examiner who stood in front of cameras the day after the death and said drugs were not a factor. And a toxicology that showed 14 drugs in his system, with the full private autopsy sealed by his family, not due for public release until 2027. Number 1, Elvis Presley.
friend, I'll say it clear.
Elvis Presley died on August 16, 1977. He was 42 years old, found on the bathroom floor at Graceland by his fiancée, Ginger Alden. The next morning, medical examiner Dr. Jerry Francisco held a press conference. He told reporters preliminary findings indicated cardiac arrhythmia, heart attack, natural causes, and then he said drugs were not a contributing factor.
It's full, I traveled each.
The toxicology said something else entirely. When Dr. Norman Weissman, a California toxicologist who analyzed the biological samples taken at autopsy, testified at the subsequent criminal trial of Elvis's physician, he told the court that he had found 14 different drugs in Elvis Presley's system, 10 of them in significant quantities, codeine at 10 times the accepted normal maximum dose. Weissman told that courtroom he had never seen such a concentration of depressants, not in his career. Dr. Francisco told the press drugs were not a factor. Here's the machinery behind that statement. Francisco had witnessed the autopsy, but was not part of the pathology team. The two physicians who actually performed the examination, Drs. Muirhead and Floredo, reportedly later acknowledged that Francisco had made his public announcement without their consent or agreement. And PBS, reporting on this case, states directly, the other pathologist eventually revealed that Francisco had covered up the real cause of death at the request of Elvis's family, who were deeply concerned about how Elvis would be remembered. Think about that for a second.
But then again, too few.
Elvis Presley, the man President Nixon personally gave a Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs badge to in one of the most surreal photographs in American history, died at 42 with 14 substances in his system. Most of them prescribed by a single physician, Dr. George Nicopolis, Dr. Nick, who had provided Elvis with over 10,000 doses of medications in just the 7 months before his death, sedatives, narcotics, amphetamines, barbiturates. Dr. Nick was indicted for overprescribing, acquitted, indicted again, acquitted again. His medical license was finally suspended in 1995, revoked permanently in 2010. He died in 2016. He said to the end that he was acting in Elvis's best interests.
What I had to do and saw it through.
Elvis's father, Vernon, requested a second private autopsy. He signed off on sealing the results until the 50th anniversary of Elvis's death. In 1982, ABC News went all the way to the Tennessee Supreme Court to force the release. The court denied it. Those records won't open until August 16th, 2027. You know, the version of Elvis that the culture keeps alive. The voice, the movies, the jumpsuits, the 1968 comeback. What most people don't know is what the final years actually looked like. The weight, the deterioration, the people in his circle who saw what was happening and said nothing.
Without exemption, I plan.
If you've ever watched someone you cared about in a slow decline, surrounded by people who kept saying yes when the answer should have been no, you know what that particular silence looks like from the inside. The sealed autopsy isn't protecting a mystery. DOOR is protecting a specific and documented set of failures, a physician, a family, an industry that nobody with the power to stop them chose to stop. 42 years old, 14 drugs, a medical examiner who stood in front of cameras the next day and lied, and the full record locked in a file until next year.
No, not me, I did it my